Hello, everyone.
Welcome to Talking Time with Caffeine, the only podcast where we do stuff like this. This is my first after-show debate after-show program.
Had happened sooner or later, I guess.
Yeah, I hope it's fun. I think it will be.
I think it will be too.
And Dapper.
Yeah. Yes.
I'm getting an echo right here. There.
You're getting an echo from me?
No, echo from myself.
Oh, okay.
My YouTube channel turned on automatically.
Oh, right.
So
anyways,
you don't think it's my fan at all?
I can't hear your fan.
Anyways, I was saying, Eric's been on my channel before, but Dapper Dino's a new guest before we talk so introduce yourself, new guest.
So I'm the Dapper Dino. I run a YouTube channel by the same name. My content is mostly counter creationism, especially young Earth creationism. I go into a lot of stuff like paleontology. There's geology. There's astronomy in there. There's some sprinkling of physics in there. I would say that the area I'm strongest on is probably Mesozoic ornithodyrans is probably my strongest area, followed by sort of a pretty good internal cladistics map that I still double check every once in a while. But yeah, those are probably my strong areas. So if you like that kind of stuff, check out my channel. There's links somewhere probably.
So was this your first moderation, being a moderator?
Yes, it was. Actually, not just on air, but ever.
Guess that happened sooner or later.
Yeah, exactly. And it was. I had a lot of fun. When it was over, I was a little tired.
I can understand why.
Yep. And I think both debaters did a pretty good job of not talking over. I got a little bit less well-behaved during the Q&A, but
Yeah, I would say it got a little heated then. And and what's funny, originally who I asked to be the moderator was actually Michael, but then Michael said that he didn't really know what to do, as the moderator, and then my friend Michael's very, very passionate about his projects, and so then after that I thought that, hey, maybe a way to bring exposure to his projects is if I bring him on, to do the debate with me.
Okay. Well, I think so. I've had a day or so to sort of reflect on it. I guess now I've had almost 2 days to reflect on it.
Yeah.
And I think that overall, I think Cody probably would have been convincing to other young Earth creationists. I don't think he would have been terribly convincing to people who aren't young Earth creationists. And I think a lot of that had to do with the fact that he was pretty slick in terms of his opener, and I feel like he did a little bit more prep work in terms of coming up with how he was going to say what he was going to say. Not necessarily the research part, but just the sort of writing out a script.
From what I rewatched it this morning, part of it at least, but from what I remember of it, is that he didn't really get any evidence of the actual thing. He just said all he did really was make talked about how the Bible is the authority.
Yeah, and he tried to use dragon legends as evidence for some reason.
Yeah, and the thing about biblical authority, that even was something that I pointed out to him, and like that's not an issue on biblical authority, it's an issue on interpreting scripture. And I even point out to him like that flat earthers, dinosaur deniers, they all will say the same thing, like you're undermining biblical authority. Oh yeah, and Cody left a comment saying I wish I could join. Like this just popped up.
Well, I'd say give him the link. I'm perfectly happy to have him in.
And Joseph Grant said, "Too bad, Dapper Dino's great."
Well, thank you.
Too bad for what?
I'm not sure actually what the too bad part is.
Yeah, I'm not sure either.
But I will say, I think Cody definitely lost at least the audience who was in the chat when he said, oh, what was it exactly he said? I think it was when I believe it was when the question of, because I was trying to get it back on topic because we were going on to Adam and Eve and things, and the chat was saying, hey, we need to get this back on topic. And so I tried to push it towards what evidence would you present that doesn't depend on the Bible?
Mm-hmm.
And the answer was none. I think he lost anyone who didn't already agree with him at that point.
Yeah, and the thing about, what?
Oh, no, I just...
Oh, sorry. And so, like I said during the debate, it's not like that I am, it's not like that I'm anti-young earth creationist or anything. I have friends who are young earth creationists, and that's fine. We agree to disagree. It's just the issue that I have is when, young earth creationists will then say, oh, well, it's either you interpret it my way or the highway. And what I was trying to point out to him is like that's actually causing a lot of Christians to leave the faith. It's because when they go off to college and learn about evolution and then they feel like that, oh, well, I have to choose either the science or my faith. And when I talked with Mary Schwartz on the phone a year ago, she actually told me like that a lot of her students will come into her office, bawling their eyes out, feeling like that they have to give up their faith. And I've had a lot of Christian parents come up to me telling me like that they're horrified of taking their kids to the Museum of the Rockies because of evolution. And I've had a lot of my Christian friends come up to me telling me that, oh, well, I don't know if I have to give up my faith because of evolution. And even the majority of atheists actually were once Christians, like Richard Dawkins, Hugo and Jake, Heath, and etc. Most of them will tell you like that they were once Christians, but then when they're presented the evidence for evolution and old Earth, they felt like that they had to give up their faith. And so,
yeah, I went from like old Earth creationist. I think I was ever a young Earth creationist. I think it was an old Earth for a while. Then I went to the theistic evolutionist.
And Cody, maybe you did give more than Dragon Legends. I seem to remember that being a large portion of it. But did we give Cody the link?
I also remember like that Cody even mentioned like the T-Rex soft tissue.
Yeah, but has Cody been given the link?
I have no idea. He said, kind of wish I could join. I assume I won't be sent a link.
I would like for him to be sent a link. I'm not sure how to do that on my end.
I'm not sure either.
You just copy and paste the link and send it to him. Like I have no way to contact him.
You sent us in Discord. All right. Eric, I assume you have the his Cody's contact info, right? Because I don't.
I do have his email.
All right. Could you email him that link?
Yeah. Hold on.
Okay.
Let me.
Because Cody, I would very much prefer that you have a link sent to you.
Okay.
That would be my strong preference.
Okay. Let me. Okay.
Although,
So, anyways,
what? Sorry, I was going to say I have to admit that one of the areas where I sort of broke the whole moderator role thing is I have a bit of a pet peeve, which is when people try to use their understanding of the quote original language of a text when it's a language they don't speak. So, yeah. Like when someone starts going on about the ways that you can use the word yom in Hebrew, or what the Greek word that's in most Bibles translated as faith actually means in Greek, and they don't actually speak Hebrew or Greek. And so that's where I lost a little bit of my complete neutrality there, because it's just one of those things that gets me, because I see a lot of people do it, and it's just it leads to people making bad arguments without knowing it because they think they know more than they do about the language.
Yeah, and the thing about the Hebrew word yom, and I mean, there are some times in the Bible when it does mean a 24-hour day, but there's also times when it can mean a lot of things. It can mean ago, always, and etc. And so, and then,
I mean,
even though
I can't speak. The closest I come to knowing much about the Hebrew word yom is that I know most of the uses for the Arabic cognate in Arabic. That's about as much as I get.
We're fast before Cody gets on here. Eric, was there any part of the debate you thought you did bad in? Like any part you could do over again?
Because it got off topic with Adam and Eve, I kind of felt like I should have done a little bit more research on that. But at the same time, though, afterwards, I did do the research, and it actually did back up like my claim. It actually says in 1 Corinthians, and like that model of man will be like the dust and like to represent human mortality, and man, it also backs up like my whole claim about how you have to be cautious about taking some things in the Bible too literally. And Adam and Eve are supposed to represent all of humanity, for our sinful matter. And even in the original Hebrew text, when I've done some research, it actually doesn't even mention rib at all. That actually is just something like that was just matted in and through English translations, probably because I just don't think they had a word for that. It actually says that Eve was made from Adam's side, and the word side in Hebrew is actually Hala, and which is supposed to represent, like the Eve is Adam's other half.
And see, the thing for me is I have no way to evaluate that argument, but I'm also not sure if you do, because I don't think you know very much Hebrew. And that's the kind of thing that gets me, is you could be right, and you could actually have sources that say that, like sources that are Hebraists and things like that. But to me, it's sort of one of those things where it's you saying that about the Hebrew word means as much for me personally as, just some guy who wandered in off the street and he's like, hey, did you know that the Hebrew word for lie is NASA? And that means NASA tells lies? Because I've heard that one too.
I have. What?
So to me, unless you have a working knowledge of classical Hebrew, it's I don't know how to evaluate arguments from someone who doesn't speak Hebrew about Hebrew.
Well, I can understand where you're coming from, but
hold on, Cody wants. So Cody, there was a link in the general chat channel in the podcast videos and information. So if you click on that chat channel, the StreamYard's link should be in there. I guess I thought it'd be sent the StreamYard's link directly, but if you click podcast videos and information. Sorry about that.
Yeah, but what I was also wanting to say is the reason why that I say all that is because I have went and looked up, the experts who actually have, who actually have studied, the original Hebrew text, right. Scholars and all that.
Right, and that's fair. And in those cases, I would say, if you were to say that in a video or something, I would expect your citation for that to be in there.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
And it's kind of like how when Chris and Claire would do some of her, I think that this is Cody.
Cody, is that you?
Hello?
Oh, hey.
Hey.
What's up, Cody?
Hello.
Welcome.
How's it going?
Good.
Oh, good.
I'm sorry, I don't have a camera.
Hey, you know what?
Okay.
I actually just got a new camera. One of my fans bought me a camera.
Wow.
That was very nice. I'm gonna be thanking her in not the video I'm making now, because that's all re-recorded and I don't want to go back and re-record it. But I'm gonna put something thanking her in my next video. But yesterday I went to go take out my trash, and I opened the door and there's a little package from Amazon. I'm like, what's this? I didn't order anything. and it says to the Dapper Dino, and I'm like, well, that's not normally how I address things to myself.
Yeah.
And then sure enough, turns out that it got purchased from my Amazon wish list. So that's really awesome.
So
Nice.
Since you're new here, you're a new guest. Introduce yourself, new guest.
Introduce myself.
Yeah.
I'm the same guy as from the debate, so hi.
But this is my audience, so they might not know you.
Oh, I see. So, I did a debate with Eric and his friend Michael, and my name's Cody Sorensen, and yeah, that's about it. I don't know what to say.
Well, you also have
Short and sweet.
a ministry called Spirit-Filled Apologetics, or is it a channel?
Yeah, that's well, the YouTube channel is Cody Sorensen, but
Okay.
Yeah.
So are you trying to make we'll see, I see Spirit-Filled Apologetics. Is that the name of the ministry you'd like to get off the ground, or what's the deal?
yeah,
Okay.
that's basically it.
And I
Okay,
also am assuming like that your ministry is something that you recently. I'm assuming that this is something what you recently decided to start.
Yeah.
Okay.
I thought so.
What's the is there going to be a particular focus, or is this general apologetics, or
Basically just like in the about section on the YouTube channel, I just put that I'm defending the reason for the channel is to teach Christian apologetics and defend the Christian faith by accepting the biblical authority of the Word of God without reinterpretation or compromise. So it's pretty broad, honestly.
Okay.
I think that'd be what most people would say anyways. But
hey, I mean that's a perfectly reasonable description. I mean, not everything has to be a laser focus. There's a good reason to have breadth
Yeah,
in your content.
I don't want to get too focused. I want to stay broad with it, you know?
Yeah.
So I asked Eric what he thought he could have done better. What about you, Cody? You think you could have done better at the debate? Any particular part of the debate you could have done better at?
Yeah, definitely. I'm not going to say, but yeah.
Don't want to show your hands.
But I also guess to be fair, you know, I can imagine like that probably a lot of debaters like would feel that way about every single debate.
Oh yeah. See, I thought of a million good responses after the debate, but not, you know what I mean.
Yeah,
that's always how it is.
I also
I
have
should
to.
have said, or I shouldn't have said. Yeah.
Yeah.
that happens a lot.
Yeah. In fact, my debate with Kent Hovind, after I finished, even though I thought I did really well, there was like about 8 or 9 points where I was like, oh, I shouldn't have gone here, or I should have done this instead, or
It's the heat of the moment and the pressure, you know.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, and you know, and that's completely understandable. It's because through research, I have seen and like that the biggest fear that people have is like to speak in front of a large group of people, and even though that we technically weren't, is because we're talking in front of a screen. But at the same time, though, people were watching you, and felt that in a way, yeah, you were talking in front of a large amount of people.
Yeah, that's why I didn't ever look at the chat.
I do have a question about your debate. You did it on StreamYard too, right?
Yeah, it was StreamYards.
Yeah. You guys ever think about using like the share screen to like share like notes and like do notes and stuff, like visual aids for your debate, or was this talking debate?
I thought about it. I thought about sharing pictures, but I didn't really want to accidentally share my notes on the screen. I didn't want to be seen, so I just held back from it.
And that was kind of the problem that I had. I was trying to figure out a way how I could, slideshows, while when being live. I was trying to figure that out, but I just couldn't figure it out. And then that was why I felt like I had to resort to, putting off pictures on my computer.
One thing I can suggest is get like a cheap second monitor, and then you can screen share from the main monitor, and then you can have things that you would rather not have revealed, like your debate notes or whatever, on the other monitor, and then unless you slide them over to the first monitor,
here's the problem for me. I actually I have 3 monitors, but they don't fit on my desk, so I can only use one. So it doesn't really work.
That could be a problem. Well, in that case, it's time for a bigger desk.
Yeah, it is.
So, but yeah, that's a problem. I can see that.
Excuse me.
I guess the only other thing I could think of would be like if you had like a tablet or something, and you could keep like if you had like your notes or whatever in like a Google Docs or some kind of
Oh yeah, I
cloud-based
could have
thing,
done that.
you could just have them on that, and that way there's even less chance of them showing up on screen. But
Yeah.
with one monitor, it's tough to make sure that you're screen sharing exactly what you want and not other stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So, in fact, even every time my desktop app suddenly shows up when I'm streaming, and it's not like there's anything embarrassing there. It's just a bunch of games, some pictures, and a background of Godzilla. Like, I'm not embarrassed by it. But whenever I accidentally reveal it, I'm like, oh, crap, that's unprofessional. Shouldn't be
I've seen some games set up that they have like 3 or 4 monitors.
Oh, yeah. I only have one monitor that I really use for games. The other one usually has, like, well, my primary monitor is mostly for games and animating, because most of my a lot of my videos are fully animated. And the other one tends to be there for other media or reference pictures and stuff like that.
Yeah, and I think that you told me what you use for animations in your videos, but but I'm just not sure if you told me or not. I can't really.
So I use Blender 3D. It's a free open source. It's a very full-featured 3D application. It has modeling, texturing, physics simulations. It has an editing timeline for editing video or audio. It's not great for editing audio, but don't edit audio in Blender.
No, don't do that.
If you need to edit a video that already has the audio figured out, then it's fine. Yeah, it's pretty good. I use a render farm called Sheepit, which is a free sort of crowdsourced rendering solution, where there's an executable that you use, and you render whatever frames there are that people need rendered, and each frame that you render gives you points. And then when you need frames rendered, each frame that someone else renders for you costs you some of your points. So,
Okay.
Yeah, and that's how I get that done. It's still a fairly involved process. This video is going to be about 22 minutes long, and I think it's going to be, when all is said and done, probably 15, 16 hours of work. So, but actually, speaking of the, Cody, you had brought up the soft tissue in the Tyrannosaurus.
Yeah, soft tissue in a lot of dinosaurs.
Yeah, well, that actually is going to be a part of my next video because, and this was actually not planned because of the debate. This was already in the works days beforehand.
Coincidence.
But yeah, so I actually have a friend of mine actually did an on-air interview with the woman who made that discovery in the first place.
Yep.
And so I'm going to be having her own words from her own mouth as part of that video. There's a little 2-minute or so slice where she talks about the discovery, what she can and can't say about it in terms of what the data will and won't support, as well as things about dating. So dating walks, not dating like finding a romance partner.
Don't use eHarmony, that's for sure.
Okay, well, I'll
or even like Match.com.
Yeah.
Guess guess you can say it wasn't a good match.
Yeah.
But yeah, and Dapper, didn't they also find soft tissue in Leonardo?
So it's one of the things is there's a difference between finding soft tissue preservation at all and finding soft tissue where we can do things like get protein sequences. I'm not sure if that recent find involved that, but there are more cases where soft tissue has been permineralized. So for instance, there was that, I think it was Borealopelta recently found in Canada. I know it was a nodosaur, and I think it was Borealopelta, but my nodosaurine memory is not great. But anyway, that had extensive preserved soft tissue, but it was permineralized. You couldn't get any original organic material out of it. But then there are also exceptionally unusual circumstances in very high iron content bedding, where there has been the discovery of proteins that have been sequenced, as well as chemistry consistent with DNA, but we don't currently have the data to say that it is actually 100% for sure DNA, or that it's 100% sure from the animal whose bone is preserved. So it's, yeah.
Nice.
I have a question about the debate real fast. So whose idea was it, and how did you find or pick your opponent?
Well, what happened was after when I re-uploaded my debate with Ken Hovind on my channel, I can probably safely assume like that Cody typed in Ken Hovind debate or something on YouTube, and then he came across mine, and then he left me a comment saying that he wished that he debated me, and I'm like, well, if you want to have your chance, if you want to have your chance, we certainly can arrange that.
Yep. I was like, I wish I could have debated you, because I didn't think Kent Hovind did very good.
He usually doesn't.
And so Cody, I could probably safely assume that you found my debate, but like by typing in Ken Hovind debate or something like that.
Yeah, I found it on his channel. When I typed in Kent Hovind debate, I saw it on his channel. Or no, was it on his channel or yours? I don't. But I
don't think he ever re-uploaded it on his. I know it was originally on Praise That I Am or something like
Praise
that.
I Am That I Am.
Yeah. Like that channel has a name that just rolls right off my tongue.
Yeah, I get why it's named that, but like, it's not. It's not the most wonderful name in terms of like comprehension and.
Did you ask Deborah Dino to be the moderator, or did he volunteer?
I believe you asked on Twitter, right?
Yeah, I believe I asked you on Twitter, and so originally I asked Michael to be the moderator, but then Michael said he really didn't know what to do, and since my friend Michael's very passionate about his projects, and Michael and I have been good friends for about a year now, I just wanted to be a good friend, and I just kind of thought that maybe like that, him debating with me and like would bring exposure to his projects. And so, yeah, I mean, it kind of sucks by the fact that, like that the technical side didn't work on his part.
Yeah, that was frustrating.
Oh,
yeah, I really liked Michael's questions too, but oh well.
Yeah, that's one of those things where maybe next time if Michael's going to come on something, there needs to be like the previous day iron out technical stuff.
Yeah.
I had a little technical trouble at first. I'm on my laptop right now because my desktop just wouldn't connect to StreamYard properly, like at all.
Do what you got to do.
Yeah, so I was like, whatever. I'm gonna go grab my laptop.
My last two things with Tony Reed, he had to use his cell phone for StreamYard because his computer broke. So he was always glitching in and out.
And
Eric was there.
He had some problems with his debate with Ken Hovind, didn't he?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, that whole debate, I guess pretty much delayed, I guess you could put it, or put off or whatever, like for half an hour more, at least around there, because of all the technical, problems. And
and Joseph Grants, from my understanding, and it's been a while since I looked at the paper on this, that the proteins that were found in the T-Rex femur were collagens, and they were sequenced. Now, one thing is protein sequences aren't as useful as DNA sequences because multiple codons will code for the same amino acid, and so you cannot get a one-to-one DNA sequence from a protein sequence, even though you can always get the protein sequence from the DNA sequence, sort of a one-way thing. But they were compared to the proteins of living diapsids, and they were closest to birds and next closest to crocodilians, which is what would have been expected according to the birds or dinosaurs taxonomy.
Yeah, and also, with Schweitzer's original discovery, they actually found like that the collagen in it is identical to ostrich collagen too.
I hadn't heard that it was identical, although it wouldn't
Well,
shock me.
maybe not 100%, or at least like 98 or 90%. You know, pretty close to it.
Yeah, and also, Mary Schweitzer, as far as I know, still has not made the claim that the round red structures are definitely red blood cells, but they are morphologically consistent with archosaur blood cells from living archosaurs.
Yeah, and correct me if I'm wrong. From my understanding, she actually found like preserved hemoglobin and not blood cells.
Well, she found heme groups, which is one of the constituents of hemoglobin.
Mhm.
So, heme groups are a part of the oxygen transport chemistry, and they're not quite the entirety of hemoglobin, but hemoglobin is composed of heme groups. Hemoglobin itself is not the sturdiest of molecules, but the heme groups that can help make it up are more robust. So it's not too surprising that hemoglobin itself wasn't actually found.
Right, and when I was on the phone with her a little bit over a year ago, she also even brought up and like that there actually were some people like who assumed, and I can understand why, thinking like that. Oh, she found this from a T-Rex, and so then that might mean it's a possibility. Then he can pull a Jurassic Park and bring back a T-Rex, but unfortunately, there just wasn't anything to work off of, in that discovery for that. So
yeah. Oh, Cody, what was the name of the article about a Cretaceous rabbit? Do you remember that?
It wasn't. Actually, it wasn't art. It was a video by Creation Magazine Live, and they were going over all the animals that supposedly were mistakenly dated to be, millions of years old, like a rabbit. I could just send you the video if you'd like a link to the video.
Yeah, that would be great. Or you can send it.
I was just actually gonna email it to you today, but
okay. Well, that would be cool. Because actually, who was it? I don't remember who it was, but it was a viewer sent me a comment about said something like, "Oh, there was a rodent found in supposedly Cretaceous soil," and I said, "Well, yeah, that's Gliers diverged from Archontins about in the sort of the middle period of the Cretaceous, even though the Cretaceous is only divided into early and late, which I hate. But and then rodents diverged from Gliers towards the end of the Cretaceous, so that's pretty much when I would expect you to start seeing rodents in the fossil record, based on both the fossils as well as molecular studies. So I don't know. I think one of the things is that I think people don't understand the timeline that is proposed by evolutionary biology for mammal evolution. Like, I feel like a lot of people have this idea that according to the theory of evolution, mammals started 66 million years ago. The dinosaurs died, and then mammals appear. But that's not true. In fact, a lot of the very early divergence of mammals happened towards the later part of the Mesozoic, like the split between Loricitherians and the rest of mammals, which includes like the Afrotheres and stuff, that happened in the Jurassic. And then, bats were around during the end Cretaceous. So at one point, there were 3 lines of flying tetrapods flying around the air. So sorry, go ahead.
Have you been watching the Aaron Ra's video of the line thing?
The systematic classification of life?
Yeah, the 20 videos of mammals.
I think he's on something like 23, and he's only now getting up to hominini, and I think his first video included something like 6 clades. So if he'd taken a video per clade, he'd still be somewhere around like theriiforms or something. So yeah, it's certainly an interesting video series, and I also appreciate giving the anatomical traits associated with each clade that he's going through is nice.
Yeah, I did not realize until I watched that the scientists think there were so many lines between just like the amniote split and mammals themselves that like I knew about cyanide and stuff like that, but how many different little individual things there were, or between what else was there? Yeah, a lot of different things. I had no idea how vast it was. And
well, actually, that phylogenetics and cladistics thing is actually, it's something that I'm always curious what the creationist take is on it. So actually, so Cody, you would say that there are, like, perhaps all of the equines or the canids would be related to each other, and maybe that, like,
Explain to me what those are, and I'll give you an answer.
The Equidae is the family that includes horses, zebras, donkeys, as well as
they're all related.
Okay, and like maybe all
They're
the canids, which would be like
all
foxes,
the same
horses,
sort.
Yeah, and then maybe all the canids, like foxes and dogs and jackals and.
Yep, they're all related because they're also the same sort.
Okay, but where do you cut that off? Are horses and rhinos related to each other?
No. Can they mate and produce offspring?
Well, not all dogs can do that either, or all canids can do that.
No, but my point is, can a rhino mate with a horse and produce offspring?
Well, no, but so does that mean that foxes and the African painted dog aren't the same sort? Because they can't either.
Well, I'm not sure.
Neither can a Great Dane and a Chihuahua.
Yeah,
well, they're genetically compatible. I
mean, they're not going to do it, but what I'm saying is genetically, if they can genetically do it, they're the same. Well, okay, it's more about baraminology, and that's a whole study within itself. And so it basically comes down to how did the ancients classify animals, and some of it was very similar to how we do it today. Of course, they didn't believe in evolution and all these ideas, so there's a lot of differences, obviously, but from what baraminology shows is that basically they would classify animals kind of how we have canine, feline, you know what I mean? Just the basic family classifications.
So what about groups where within a family, so I guess my question then is, most families of animals include genetically incompatible species.
Well, yeah, of course that's going to happen.
So
they're so distant in species. I'm not saying that you defined a sort specifically by can they mate and produce offspring. I think that's just one of the main factors, though.
Oh, Lamont left.
Lamont, if he leaves, does our stream end?
No, I was just going to get a drink. I want to be off. I was going to drink of water. I don't want to be off.
No, no worries.
Okay.
Yeah. Oh, sorry. We were a little worried there. So
yeah, I was like, "Are you all right?"
So then, I guess the question then would be, okay, well, if that means that your reason for why the rhinoceros and the horse aren't in the same kind,
it's very, very self-evident that a rhino and a horse are nowhere near the same family of animal.
I would agree that they're very distant if you only look at modern forms, but there are fossil horses and fossil rhinoceros that look almost identical, except for details of the dentition that I can barely even notice. And the only other big difference that I can see in the fossil forms of rhinoceros and horses are the horses tend to have longer nasal bones. So,
okay,
what about those animals? Where there are places where it takes an expert, and I mean someone who spends.
Oh, I know that's what the study. I know that's what the study of trying to figure out how to classify animals, because sometimes it's really, really difficult. Like, how do you classify a platypus? Good luck. I mean, obviously they do, but it's not easy.
It's a monitoring.
I know it has been. What I'm saying, it's difficult because what is this animal? But I'm saying there's the whole study of classifying animals. I'm not saying that it's super easy to tell. What I'm saying is that all the species of canine and dogs all in the world came from two ancestors.
Right. But the reason that I'm saying that, it seems like the reason you're saying that is because they tend to be very similar animals.
So,
Well, the reason I'm saying that is based on Genesis.
so Cody, do you think that horses, rhino, do you think horses, rhinos, and humans and all of them are all animals or mammals themselves?
They're all animals. Well, humans, I wouldn't say are directly animals. I mean, technically, but not biblically. We're very different.
What does that mean technically?
Technically, if you were just to get someone to just look at like someone that's completely ignorant with everything, they would probably say that humans were just an advanced animal. But biblically, humans are not animals. They have dominion over animals, but they have a spirit which no animal actually has. Plants are just biological machines. They don't have a soul. Animals have a soul, but they don't have a spirit. People have a soul and a spirit, and they are made in the image of God, so they're very different from animals. But scientifically, just trying to classify, well, I guess you would say, even Christians, I would say, humans are kind of animals, you know.
I think you might have gotten the soul and spirit swapped there.
No, animals do not have a spirit because they don't go anywhere when they die. A spirit is where you go, is what is you that goes to the afterlife, according to.
I thought that was the soul that went to the afterlife.
No. A lot of people don't understand the difference between a soul and a spirit, and they're not the same thing either. A soul is like personality, like you, like kind of like what you think of someone when you're thinking about them. Like it's really the soul, but the spirit is you, like what happens to you when you die, like where you go. Your spirit goes to heaven, and everyone mixes up. They think it's soul. It's not the way it is. You know what I mean?
Well, the reason I say that is because the word spirit is usually used to actually it even in Latin, and its ultimate derivation, including where it's used to translate, is usually things to do with the breath of life, which is a term that the Bible uses, and the word spirit itself comes from the same root as respiration and aspiration.
I mean, the New Testament makes it clear there's a difference between soul and spirit. So,
I agree. I just feel like we might be mixing those two up. But then again, I'm not really an expert on that matter either, and I don't really care which one is which.
Sorry to borrow Jim, but Joseph Grant left a comment saying that this discussion is going way off track, and he said good night. And I kind of think that implies that he left.
Oh well.
So
I didn't realize there was a specific topic.
Yeah, I didn't either. I thought we were going to hang out after the debate and chat about stuff. So,
but
if it's not interesting to you, then
thinking that he said that probably because he was expecting we were going to be talking about the debate itself.
I mean, the debate.
I thought this kind of was.
To some extent, the debate can kind of stand on its own, and I feel like this is a chance to talk about things that, in a less formal setting, that have to do with the topics around the debate, and I think this is still that. But
yeah, I also,
Cody, there was something you said, and it was the reason that you said that these things were related was Genesis. But the thing is, no one's going to be able to read Genesis and then go out into the world and on the basis of no other evidence than looking around and holding Genesis in front of them, determine whether the African painted dog and the maned wolf and the gray wolf.
I didn't say we classify animals based on Genesis. I said that because of Genesis, I know that all canines are from two dogs. That's my point. But baraminology and how the ancient way that they would classify animal or modern is its own thing. I'm not saying we use Genesis to classify animals. I'm saying I believe that animals are not all related because of Genesis.
Right. And what my question is, as I'm trying to understand what it is that is the reason that you would say, okay, canids are their own kind of animal, but borophagenes, which differ from canids basically only in a few minor ways having to do with the jaw and ear, aren't. And why horses would be a kind and rhinos would be a different kind, even though some examples of these animals are so close to each other that it takes decades of study to figure out which one is which. And so
Yep.
I don't understand what the reasoning is behind where you pick that line. And that's what I'm trying to get at, because if you just take modern animals, you can kind of just lump them into a few categories. But if we take into account all of the animals that we have evidence of, it becomes a little bit tougher, and it's not easy to see why is it that rhinos are one group and horses are another, even though there are horses and rhinos that are almost identical to each other and look more like each other.
What are you talking about?
Are you unaware of the fossil record for equids and rhinocerosidae?
Well, are you talking about like a theory of what they would look like if they were related, or
No, like taking the bones and figuring out, okay, I have a dentary bone. I know it's the dentary bone of a paracedactyl, but I don't know if it's the dentary bone of a rhino or a horse. They're both the same size. They both have molars used for grinding plants. And the only way I can distinguish them, and this is a real world problem that happens in actual paleontology, is that you have to go in and do things like carefully measure the molar cusps and count up the cusps very carefully and sort through them, because in the smaller, and I know you would dispute the dating, but according to the mainstream dating methods, earliest horses and rhinos, their fossils are essentially identical. The only differences are in the teeth and the nasal bone. They're both 3-hoofed ungulates that carry the majority of the weight on the middle hoof, which is, I think it's digit 3, but I would have to double check. They both are about the size of a large house cat or a small dog. Well, a little bigger than that, but still. I mean, they both have the same everything. The only distinguishing feature is slight differences in the shape of the molars. And so I don't know why it is that we can say, oh, this group clearly couldn't be the same group because they're so different now.
I didn't say they could clearly. I never said it was obvious. This is why we have to do a deep study about it. They've been doing this for thousands of years, and they do it very differently. The way they did it then was very differently than it is today. I mean, do you ever think maybe that what you're describing in the fossils, if it exists, I'm not even sure. I'm not saying you're lying. I'm saying I think what you're saying is actually just theories of what could exist based on evolution. But what I'm saying is that maybe what you're describing in these fossils is actually a whole other kind within itself, and they're just they don't understand it because it's extinct, and maybe it was alive only thousands of years ago, but it went extinct and it died in a flood and it was deposited into fossils.
So it's a kind that didn't make it on the ark?
No, a kind that could have made it on the ark. I'm saying it probably could be a different species or something we just don't understand. It doesn't necessarily mean therefore it's therefore it's the ancestor of a horse and a rhino. I think that's
I'm not even making the claim
conclusion.
I'm not even making the claim that it's the ancestor of the horse or the rhino. I'm just saying
that your whole thing is that, well, we see that in the fossils that rhinos and horses are so similar we can barely tell the difference. Therefore, how do you know what a kind is? What I'm saying is, how do you know that that's the ancestor of those two animals to begin with?
I'm not making the claim that it is.
You literally made the claim that because I can't. You're saying that I can't. How can you know what a kind is if we don't? If we see in the fossil record that apparently these animals are so similar, there's no way to tell what a kind is.
Well, my point is, if we're going to say that similar animals, because we've already said that just breeding isn't enough, because
it's not enough.
Right. So I can accept if they can breed, then they would have to be the same kind. Okay.
Yep.
But we also have examples where most people who are creationists say, well, these animals that can't breed are still in the same kind anyway. So that means that breeding can't be our determiner. It's not
the determiner, but it's a big indicator. It really helps.
Right, it does. But in cases where there's no breeding, you have to go with some kind of similarity.
Yeah. So Cody, what's your opinion on this? On like similarity again? About the similarity of the DNA, how close some things are to each other.
Well, that's pretty obvious. See, what DNA shows is that it shows when you see similarities in DNA, for some reason people make the assumption, well, then they're related. But no, the reason that there's similarities is because there would have to be similarities. That's how code works. And of course, code shows intelligent designer, in my opinion, but that's another topic. But so when you have similarities, for example, a chimpanzee and or ape and a human, well, of course, based on how they're built, they're going to have similar code or similar DNA. It would have to be that way, but it doesn't mean that they must be related. Therefore, it's not really. It's because the same designer designed. Like, here's a really cliche, generic, overused example, but PowerPoint has code. Microsoft Word has code. They're coded by, in general, the same people, and they have very, very similar code. But it does not mean that, therefore, they're related to each other. They came from the same designers.
So, Cody, I have a question. Have you ever heard of the protein Preston?
Yeah, I'm not super educated on that stuff, but I've heard of this.
So Preston is a protein that's used to facilitate echolocation in both bats and cetaceans. Well, Microchiroptera, since Megachiroptera has no.
So I think you're gonna say because they both have that, they must be related.
No, I'm not.
Okay.
So if you do what a protein sequence is, basically just a protein is essentially a line of amino acids, and if you write them all down, that's the protein sequence, right?
Yep.
So if you do a protein sequence for Preston in both bats and cetaceans, it comes out to be essentially identical. Okay. Actually, no, it's 100% identical if I remember correctly. But if you look at the neutral variation in the DNA, because as a result of the fact that each amino acid is coded for by multiple codons, and as a general rule of thumb, the middle base pair in a codon doesn't actually affect which amino acid is used. It's essentially a spacer. So if you look at that neutral variation where it can't actually affect the proteins or the protein sequence, there is essentially no similarity between the gene for Preston in chiropterans and the gene in Preston in cetaceans. So why is it that in places where we can say, okay, well, they need this protein to be functional to survive, and that's a good reason why they have this genetic similarity, okay, but why is there this big lack of genetic similarity in the neutral variation? But on the other hand, there isn't that similar lack of variability in the neutral parts of the genetic code when you say just restrict it to, if you look at only chiropterans. If you look at all the chiropterans, they all have very similar neutral variation in that gene. And if you look at all the cetaceans, they also have very similar neutral variation for that gene. But when you look across, there's essentially no similarity.
How is this a problem for me, though?
Well, because I would expect, if there's two options. If God is simply copy-pasting genetic code because similar design, similar code, similar designer, similar code, then I would expect all animals to either have, for the same gene, either similar or non-similar neutral variation across the board without any particular statistical groupings within smaller groups.
Okay. And
so, and that's not what happens. The statistical distribution of neutral variation strongly contradicts the possibility of separate descent for neutral variation in genes. Because it's true, if you're looking at functional genes that are coding for proteins that various organisms need, there's a strong conservation bias to keep those things the same. It's why you can look at genes that are universal in vertebrates. And almost every vertebrate has a nearly identical copy of this gene because it's vital for life to continue. Mutations that are functional mutations to these genes are very detrimental, so they don't persist.
I have a question for you then. Okay. So how does code evolve over time? Because code needs intelligence. Pretty simple, but I'd expect an answer.
Well, so DNA is only a code by analogy. DNA is, in fact, a molecule. And it's a molecule that we know when it reproduces can change. And the fact is, unlike computer codes or most ciphers or things, there is a large number of mutations which will still result in something that can be sequenced during protein sequencing. You can change a gene very significantly and still leave it as something that can be sequenced. So the genetic quote-unquote code is really not very analogous to computer codes or human language codes. And so it can develop over time simply because we've observed it doing so. It's not a hypothetical thing. This is a thing that occurs. De novo gene production.
So the
is
code,
well
I'm not
studied
saying that we can't observe it changing, but so you think that we have, well, you never said this, but do you think that code or DNA started from very, very, very incredibly simple to what it is now, all on its own by chance over millions of years?
Well, no, I think the most likely explanation is that RNA, which can spontaneously self-assemble, that's a thing that has
So you
also
do
been
think so it all came together by chance over millions of years?
Evolution does not say at all whether or not if it was by chance. It does not say that at all.
That's true. And also, all current hypotheses for abiogenesis do not involve it being a chance process. The universe,
I'm sorry.
yeah, so
DNA in general, though, it is chance, because if you don't believe anyone put it there, why is it there? And to have it be the way it is, it's only chance.
not having been put someplace by a person is not the same as chance.
No, what I'm saying is that just the fact that there is DNA the way it is now, without any sort of design, and to have it build up to be bigger and bigger and bigger and more complex over time, there is obviously the possibility that, well, it's not going to happen, but I'm just saying that
Right.
it is indeed chance.
When predicting something like that in the future, it's certainly statistical estimates of likelihood are useful. But the fact is that as something is happening in the physical world, if it's basically at the scale of molecules or bigger, it's not a chance phenomenon. It is governed by very non-chance laws of physics and chemistry.
But see, so you guys here, all of you, think that code can essentially create itself with no
like I
initial
said,
cause.
DNA is not itself actually.
I know
very
it's not an
analogous to
actual
code.
code, but it is indeed code.
Well,
in
it
general.
currently codes for things, but and DNA, I will try to finish the thing that I had started earlier, which is to say that RNA can self-assemble, and RNA can both catalyze its own reproduction as well as catalyze the formation of DNA. And so the most likely scenario currently is that RNA self-assembled, and then because it can catalyze its own reproduction and it can also catalyze protein synthesis on its own, it's very inefficient at it compared to, say, a ribosome. But there's a reason that the center of every ribosome is a small piece of RNA. So go ahead. No, go ahead. Take over.
And from my understanding of RNA from the research I have done, it's the RNA world hypothesis. They're not sure 100% for sure if it is RNA, but at the same time, though, scientists are just saying like that it's the most likely candidate for it. It's, from my understanding, it's because that they find a lot of like RNA cells in every single living creature, and then that's why that they say that is the most likely candidate. And with me being a theist and whatnot, I don't have a problem with learning about RNA or any of that. It's because the fact that just with me as a theist, it's just that I just don't see any problem like with the fact and like that, and like that God could have been the one to start all that, kind of like what I said during the debate, God can create the universe any way that He wants to, and I also understand like that Cody's not going to agree, and that's fine too.
Yeah, I was thinking of RNA and DNA. I was studying it. It's like there's only one letter differences. Like 3 of the letters in both DNA and RNA are the same. There's only one different letter. I forget what letter it is, but only one. There's only one letter that's different.
In terms of the base pairs for RNA and DNA, that's true. But the so-called sides of the ladders, as opposed to the rung, if we're going to use the ladder analogy, have a different chemical basis. RNA is less stable than DNA, and it's generally the biggest difference is that it's less robust. But it also, unlike DNA, can catalyze its own replication as well as catalyze protein synthesis, which is why the RNA world hypothesis seems to be a pretty good hypothesis. Also, RNA can catalyze the formation of DNA, which is based on the code already there in the RNA. So because RNA molecules can self-assemble, at which point they would have an essentially random set of base pairs, they can then, using those base pairs, catalyze protein synthesis. And if some of the RNA happens to synthesize proteins that help the RNA do better at making more RNA, then you have the start of an evolutionary process. And then eventually, if you have a system where RNA can be reasonably enclosed in some sort of stable environment that can maintain itself outside of thermodynamic equilibrium for the short term at least, then you can do things like get DNA synthesis inside that system, which will then allow for the DNA to take over the function of storing genetic material for later reproduction. And then the RNA simply becomes what it is now, essentially a messenger and DNA duplication enhancer. And so, yeah, that's sort of the basis of the RNA world hypothesis, sort of taken down to a very simple level. So the answer is the quote-unquote code would actually have pre-existed DNA, because it would have been in RNA, which only later then would have synthesized DNA based on the pre-existing base pairs in the RNA. And RNA base pairs do come into existence spontaneously without the need for any living organisms to create them.
Oh, was that to me?
Well, that was just in general the idea behind how it is the genetic material. And I'll use the word code because even though it's not super accurate, it's way easier than saying a full long explanation. And that is how the genetic code can start out initially. And after it does, then differential ability to reproduce or to survive to reproduce will allow beneficial changes to accumulate. And of course, since these systems would have had fairly low resistance to lateral gene transfer, since, I mean, they wouldn't have had time to develop such things, things that are beneficial can spread quickly throughout any given population of organisms, even that are distantly related. Because initially, it seems like life probably had a very low resistance to lateral gene transfer, or horizontal gene transfer, as it's also called.
That's when prokaryotes transfer genes?
Well, it doesn't
right?
just happen with prokaryotes. So a significant part of your genome as a human is actually has its origins in retroviruses.
Oh, yeah.
So, in fact, actually, it's been reasonably well established that the genes encoding for placental, the placenta in placental mammals,
Yeah,
actually, a lot of those genes actually originated as part of a retroviral insertion into the genome.
I've heard about that.
Yeah. So it's not just to do with prokaryotes, although that's the place where it happens the most frequently is in prokaryotes. But yeah, there's also there's a butterfly species that has taken bits of the DNA of a fungal parasite, actually a parasitoid fungus, that infects the caterpillars, and have been able to use that to help increase their resistance to that fungal parasite. So lateral gene transfer does happen. It's not very common, and it gets less common as you get multicellular life, but it's still a thing that happens. Or it's also possible that when creating a butterfly, the creator copy-pasted fungus DNA into one species of butterfly, but not others.
Yep.
That's also possible.
I mean, that's how, and that's when then natural selection takes its course. So then what can survive survives, but whatever didn't have it pre-existing in it will not survive.
Right. But then we also have mechanisms for horizontal gene transfer. So it's one of those things where it's like, at a certain point, the natural world looks so much like one that evolved that if we're going to seriously entertain the idea that it didn't, we have to invoke a deity who is essentially tricking people.
Not necessarily.
Yeah, it really is though, because
Well, how do you know everything evolved?
well, it depends on what you mean by no. Oh, sorry, Eric,
No.
you're quiet.
Oh,
Oh,
it's so good. It was you know, it was just that you all like were talking, and I didn't want to.
Oh no, I just meant you were
I just
audibly
wanted to
quiet
be
when you said something.
polite.
I do
What?
have a question for Kodio. So, a two-part question actually. So you believe in a literal 6,000 old Earth?
Yeah, just about
Don't
that.
speak Hungers.
So, evolution aside and stuff, how do you explain the like Native Americans cross? Historically they say Native Americans crossed the land bridge 10,000 years ago, and like there's settlements of North America way back then. So how do you
Well, I guess
explain that?
my question would be to you, how do you know that?
Archaeology.
Yeah, but how do you know maybe it wasn't actually as long ago as people think? My question to you.
I don't know. I'm not an archaeologist.
Okay, well, that's a cop-out. So I think that, yes, the world is about 6,000 to 7,000 years old. To answer your question.
Okay.
Well, one thing I would say is that there are, in fact, numerous archaeological dating methods which tend to do a pretty good job of cross-confirming each other. So there are things like
It's all based on assumptions. That's
Yeah.
called historical science. That's not observational science.
there is no one outside of creationist pseudoscience groups that makes that distinction.
Yes, I know, because they don't like that.
No, because there isn't a distinction.
There is. There
There
are
really
things you can
isn't.
observe, and there are things you cannot observe.
Yes.
You have to assume.
And I can observe
They're
things.
assuming the date
No,
of. Yes, they
They're
are.
completely
They
not.
are absolutely, because they don't know if their dating methods are accurate.
Yes, they do.
yes, they do.
How?
Because
Okay,
they can
Eric. Okay,
cross-check.
Eric. How do
Mhm.
they know that these Native Americans were really there that long ago?
Well, like I said during the debate, there are multiple different dating methods. You just have to
Yep.
use you just have to use the correct one, like for like a certain layer and whatnot. And so, man, so say for an example, I'm going to say I weigh. For an example, I say I'm going to say that I weigh 200 pounds. Well, and then after that, I had experiment, weigh myself in all these different machines. And if I get the same result, like which intertwine with each other, they all say that I'm 200 pounds. I then can be confident in that.
Yep. That's observable science. 10,000 years ago is not observable. That's historical.
Yes, it is.
You cannot observe 10,000 years ago. Like I said in the debate, get a laser beam and point it to the moon last Tuesday. You can't, because last Tuesday was last Tuesday. It's the past. We can only observe what we see now. And I know they say, oh, well, starlight, we're seeing into the past. Well, we're still seeing only one time period. It's not like we get to see like T1, there's T1, T2. We're only seeing T1 in that case, but for most cases, what we're observing is T2. So still, you cannot look into the past. I know they don't like this. You're only making assumptions, and even if your assumptions are correct, you don't know if your assumptions are correct. They're only assumptions. There's a huge difference between what we observe and what we think is right. It's only based on theories.
So you're right. There are only assumptions, and one of the biggest
Yes, there are assumptions.
is that is simply the assumption of science that the laws of physics are not going to vary greatly across time. That is the only big assumption. And in fact, it's no longer just an assumption, because now we can observe various periods of time astronomically.
No, you're only seeing one time.
No, we're
You're
seeing
not
many times, because
You're not
each
seeing
thing
the
that we look at
present
is
because you're
different.
looking into the past. But then again, you're not seeing what the past has done now in the future or in the present. Do you
But
see
what we
how
are
there's
seeing-
no way out of it?
Yes. Okay. I'm going to try this again. Because astronomy looks at things of very different distances, each of which would have required the light to travel a different amount of time, by looking in different places, we can see structures in the universe from different times. And in every case, all of the observable laws of physics that we can get from that are temporally consistent. There is
Yes,
no
I
significant
agree.
time change there. That is the one assumption of science that we can't actually really provide much evidence for. But in fact, we actually now do have a whole bunch of evidence for it, even though it's still a fairly big assumption. But the thing is, if that assumption weren't true, science just wouldn't work. We wouldn't be able to develop technology. We wouldn't be able to develop
what
medicine.
assumption wasn't true?
The assumption that the rules of physics are essentially consistent.
I never said they weren't.
But that is what is required by creationism.
No,
Young Earth
it's
creationism
not.
requires the laws of physics to have been broken repeatedly.
In what place?
Well, just the flood, for example.
The flood?
Yeah.
How does that go against the laws of physics?
I mean, it goes against the laws of hydrology, geology. There
No,
not actually enough water existing on Earth. Yeah, paleontology. It goes against.
But
the
give
laws
me
of
that's
population genetics.
way too broad. You're saying, oh, that's like saying, oh, it just goes against science. Tell me, how does it specifically? No, there. Okay, no.
There hasn't been enough
means
time in the past 4,000 years for the genetic diversity of all the various quote kinds that we still can't
absolutely
define
has
to
been.
recover.
There's been enough in 200 years for enough what we see in the canines. Absolutely.
No.
Yes, there absolutely has, and we're talking
For the
about
morphological
4,000
diversity, yes. But for the genetic
4,000
diversity, no.
years. There's absolutely enough time.
No, not. There's enough time to get that amount of morphological diversity from organisms starting with a pair, but there isn't enough time to get the genetic diversity that's going with it, because most of the genetic diversity that exists in life doesn't show up as gross morphological features. If you look at two animals that are almost identical, so if you look at any two gray wolves from the world, they're almost certainly much more genetically distinct than you are from any other human, because humans have an unusually low amount of genetic diversity as a species. But we still have so much genetic diversity that current mutation rates couldn't possibly account for that much genetic diversity from essentially 6 reproducing pairs, half of which
we're
were
talking about
siblings.
4,000 years. It is plenty of time for the speciation. Is absolutely enough time. It's undeniable. Any scientist will say, "Oh yeah, it is enough time."
It's enough time for that number of species to occur. It is not enough time to accumulate the current number of alleles in all of the populations that we have extant.
How do you know?
Because current
don't
mutation rates are well studied in numerous lines of organisms, and they do not lead you back. Because if we assume unclean animals, so we're only taking a pair, a male and a female, and we assume absolute complete heterozygosity for every allele, we're still only starting with 4 alleles per gene per group of organisms that are a so-called kind. If you go with observable rates of mutation, they would have had to have been exponentially larger to get the current amount of genetic diversity in 4,000 years. It simply doesn't follow the laws of science, because it requires that genetics have worked very differently in the past. But once we can look at it, once we can see it, now it doesn't work that way anymore. That is fundamentally pseudoscientific and anti-science. That is why believing in a literal global flood 4,000 years ago is contrary to science. And that is not the only case where it's like that. It's like that across the board. Every single thing that we could look at, and we would say, if there were a global flood, I would expect X. Instead, we find not X.
Okay, so what would we expect to find from a global flood at any time period, as long as there's life? We'd find hundreds of sedimentary layers with fossils deposited into the layers.
Yes,
what do we find in the world?
Layers,
what do we find in the world? What do we find? We find all these sedimentary layers without erosion marks, and what do we find in them? We find these dead fossilized creatures all deposited into it. It kind of seems more like a flood. Even a lot of scientists are well aware of this, so they say, well, it was just a bunch of local floods. I'm not talking about Christians. I mean, people that just they're trying to figure it out on their own. They think it was a bunch of local floods.
Flood as such?
What
do you know? How does a geologist look at a place and say this layer in the rock is the result of a flood?
Because they see differences in layers, that it's sedimentary particles sorted.
But specifically, why do they say this is a flood layer?
Because it's obvious. It was obviously formed by water.
Well, that's a large number of sediments. But the reason that geologists say that this particular layer is from a flood is because floods leave behind graded bedding. That's the only kind of strata that floods have ever been observed laying down. They don't lay down evaporites. They don't lay down aeolian sandstone. They don't lay down schist. They don't lay down shale. They don't lay down siltstone. They don't lay down limestone. They don't lay down any of these things. They only have ever been observed laying down graded bedding. And when we find graded bedding in the geological column, it's consistent with graded bedding formed by floods now. So if there had been a global flood, the obvious expectation and requirement, according to geology, is that there be a relatively consistent worldwide layer of graded bedding, or several layers, which represent a flood of global proportions. There is no such layer, and many of the layers that are fossil-bearing could not have formed in a flood or even underwater. Do you know what an evaporite is? It's things like salt mines. Salt doesn't just precipitate into thick layers underneath water. It's called an evaporite because it forms as water evaporates, leaving the non-volatile components of the solution behind.
Okay, so what would be your
of these fossil-bearing strata that are supposedly evidence for the flood?
Okay, so what would be your another one of your theories for the lack of erosion marks?
There are erosion marks. It's simply not true that there are none. Second, the fact that
I'd like to see that.
Well, that's one of the problems. What does it look like to have an erosion mark? If you're looking at it from a cutaway of stone, which is what most people can see when they go to see strata in places like the Grand Canyon or similar places.
Not that. That's like outside the layers. I mean, like within the layers, you see erosion like intersect. You know what I mean? I'm not talking about like just land erosion. I mean like within the strata layers,
Yeah,
you can see that.
We have ancient stream beds. That is erosion.
No. I want to see where there are a bunch of layers that have individual erosion marks within the layers itself, proving that they're time periods and not formed by water.
I mean, look at any aeolian sandstone deposit. They all have ridge marks that are the result of wind erosion eroding away.
Do you know?
Layers of it.
Okay, never mind.
That's one of the actual ways that you can tell that a sandstone happens to be aeolian sandstone is because it has characteristic cross-threading as a result of wind erosion.
Again, it's all you. I'm not. Never mind. I shouldn't say it, but like, again, all these things, these are all still. You're missing the bigger picture. Is it's all based on assumptions and assuming.
No, it's not.
It is absolutely.
Every kind of rock that has been laid down, with the exception of very few igneous rocks from the very lowest layers, can be observed forming right now. It is not an assumption to say that the process that forms, and in many cases, we understand the physics of how these rocks are formed.
No one ever saw these rocks forming.
Yeah, and no one ever saw that car that is now in the ditch with the tire marks on the road actually drive into the ditch because now the driver is dead. But you know what? I still think it's a reasonable assumption based on how the laws of physics work and how cars crash, that car skidded off the road and crashed into the ditch.
But all of your arguments are based on the uniformitarianism assumption. It's not. Again, it's all assumption.
Uniformitarian assumption?
Assuming that it's always happened without any sort of catastrophe. Well, like rocks forming, they're slowly, gradually forming over millions or hundreds of thousands of years.
That is not what uniformitarian geology says. Uniformitarian geology.
It absolutely is.
No, it's not.
You just don't like that.
What it says is that
I would like to talk to Eric. I feel like you've been taking up most of, like you've been talking for like most of the time. I'd like to hear more from the other two people here.
All right, and so what I was wanting to say earlier, but you and Dapper got a little bit busy, which is fine. Both of you are allowed, to have your time to talk. And so the bottom line job of a scientist is to observe the physical world. And most scientists do not think about God. And I mean, true, there are some scientists who are atheists who are trying to destroy God. But yet it's also not like that the whole entire scientific community is trying to do that. And so one of the key one of the most important aspects of science is that it needs to be repeatable. And if it's not repeatable, if it doesn't have any be, if it doesn't have any be, if it doesn't have any repeatable capabilities, well, then it's not science. You know, it kind of goes back to what I said about,
You're
you know,
the only evolutionist that's ever admitted this. I really thank you for this.
yeah, for sure. And I mean,
Yeah.
you know, it's one of the things that I do what I do. I mean, there are some atheist scientists, and I'm not saying that every single one of them are like this, but, you know, but there are some, and like who say that, oh, evolution disproves God, but it doesn't at all. I mean, none of the data says that.
Yeah.
Man, if it makes you feel any better, I know that I may not convince you, but you also could even look into something called process structuralism, which is which actually like was advocated by Simon Conway Morris, who, you know, who is a Christian. He even debated with Richard Dawkins, and yeah, and you know, kind of like what I said during my debate on Saturday, you know, scientists, the whole scientific community as a whole, their whole job is not to take you away from God. The bottom line is the job of a scientist is to observe the physical world.
Yeah. I agree.
Mhm.
Yep, I agree. I'm just glad you're one of the few evolutionists that will ever admit like when something is actually scientific, because that's be repeatable, demonstratable, observable. You know what I mean? And so thank you. But
Yeah, for sure. And you know, after all that testing, after all that repeatable testing, sorry,
okay.
and after all that, none of that, and I repeat, none of that has ever shown like that there is no God.
Yeah, absolutely.
None.
Absolutely.
And anybody who says that, and anybody who says otherwise, you know, as respectful as I could be, you know, people are entitled to their opinions, but having an opinion is different than a fact.
Yeah, I've always thought there were two different. I always thought there were two different subjects myself: belief in God and belief in. I'd say belief, but you know,
like no God
creationism versus evolution debate and belief in God are two different things, in my opinion. One has nothing to do with the other one.
And you know, I always wanted to emphasize on this. A year ago, when I went on this big, I mean, of course, Lamont and Dapper know about this. It was because, you know, of the podcast that I've done with both of you. A year ago, I had like the biggest question of my life. Was the Bible say about dinosaurs? It's because when I was a kid, I was really into, you know, Jurassic Park. I had all the toys and everything. So you can say that that was the planting of the seed for me, you know, for me wanting to be interested in science and all that. And when I became a Christian in 2014, because of, I don't want to get too personal, but because of a very dark event like that haunts me to this very day. I guess you could say that that just led me to the inevitable question: what does the Bible say about dinosaurs? And so, honestly, throughout the whole entire investigation, I honestly wanted it. I honestly wanted, you know, it. I wanted it to honestly lead me to the conclusion. I thought that I should decide for myself. And honestly, and my thought, I should decide truth for myself. And, you know, people can decide it for themselves. Like, say that there are disagreements about baptism in some religions. There are some where they say, like they shouldn't be baptized as a baby, while others don't, you know, and that's fine. You know, they can decide that for themselves. And, I mean, honestly, during the whole time, it wasn't like that I was like trying to prove evolution is right or wrong. I just honestly just wanted to look into it myself and see for myself, okay, is it true or not? And obviously, since you all know my stance on it now, I decided for myself, which I think is very, very important for people in their lives. Decide for yourself. But at the same time, though, I also do think that being open-minded, can definitely be a good thing.
Yeah.
Like that, say that, for example, say if I'm at the gym and if I'm doing something wrong, say if I'm not doing my squats right, if I'm not in the right position. Well, and then say if a trainer comes in and shows me, hey, you're doing this wrong, and I just want to show you this. And of course, with being open-minded, you and then can learn from what you did was wrong. One of the ways how I see it is that failures always are biggest teachers in life. And I'm also not saying that, Cody, like that you have to believe in evolution either.
Yeah. I personally, I think is once you try, I'm always trying to learn new things. I think once you stop trying to learn things and you can't really grow anymore, you always got to try to learn new things, even if not agree with it or not. Like, keep on expanding your mind.
Yeah. I have some just a question for Eric, just like about like interpreting Genesis specifically. How do you go about getting the creation account to kind of like describe evolution? Like I pointed out in the debate, I mean, they're backward in every detail. I mean, just like from what evolution says to what the clear text of Genesis says, they really are backwards. So, but how do you go about it? Like just interpreting?
Well, there are many different ways how to interpret it. And I also know that people like Ken Hamill will say, oh, well, they're just trying to force millions of years into it. But the ways of how that I personally look at it, kind of like the whole thing with Copernicus about the immovable earth, the pillars on the earth. It basically was just people just trying to, you say, okay, maybe there's something that we're missing from this. And I actually would personally argue like that they're trying to understand scripture better. It's because science has actually helped us better understand some parts of the Bible before. And I also know that people like Ken Ham will say, oh, well, the virgin birth. Yeah, to be perfectly clear, no theistic evolutionists, no old earth creationists will ever, and none of them will ever argue, about that. It's because, of course, like with us being a theist and, with God being all powerful, God can intervene whenever he wants to because he's so powerful. I don't think that he has to necessarily all the time. And there's so many different interpretations like that. Honestly, in our lifetime, we may or may never even know. Now, you could take one interpretation of it, but you don't have to. And so that was what they learned from like Copernicus and the Earth being the center of the universe. And now, just me personally, now, like I said, I decided for myself. I personally think that biblical scholar John Walton actually makes a lot of very, very good points by the fact that we have to understand the Bible in its ancient context. We have to understand their whole culture. And, from all the studies he's done, back then, the ancient people during that time, they weren't thinking about where matter comes from. And they weren't thinking about any of that. They weren't thinking about, material creation or anything. Back then, they were more so interested in how things functioned. And so basically, John Walton's cosmic temple inauguration is pretty much amidst the 7-day temple of it's a 7-day temple of like God assigning function to everything. And I even brought up no sun till the 4th day. Well, just by this particular interpretation, it's just that particular interpretation pretty much indicates like on the 4th day, like was when God assigned function to the sun. And now and certainly of course, I'm not saying that you have to take this interpretation, but it's just that one of the reasons why that I guess got convinced of it is because that he makes very, very good points about how we should read it in the ancient context. We like shouldn't just rely on English translated versions of the Bible. And now, of course, I'm not saying never ever read a English translation of the Bible. I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is that don't strictly rely. I'm just saying just don't rely on that. It's because if you rely on a plain reading of the Bible, well, like I said on Saturday night, like because it mentions unicorns and Psalms, you know, one of the most important aspects of interpreting the Bible, study the context.
Yeah, absolutely.
And when you look into the context, when it mentions unicorns in Psalms, it's actually talking about a rhino. And so, and
something like a rhino, yeah.
I know it was a particular rhino. I forgot its name off the top of my head, but
has to have one horn.
Right, but it's just like that. The bottom line is it's talking about a rhino. It isn't talking about what?
Rhinoceros unicorns. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, and so that you can say that in a way the unicorns do exist, kind of. Yeah, it's just that I know that there's a lot of disagreement with Age of the Earth within Christianity, and and people are allowed to have their interpretations, but it's just that in order for you to be saved, you don't have to go with this particular interpretation. And I mean, it's kind of like with all the differences within Catholicism and Lutheranism and etc. All of them may have their differences about some things, but the bottom line is we all believe in the same God.
Yeah. So kind of interesting, I guess, though, because like in Genesis, it doesn't really say God, it says Elohim, which actually is plural, Would you be against someone interpreting that it was actually multiple gods that created the heavens and the earth? Because,
Well, I mean, the bottom line is, it's not really any of my business, like what other people's beliefs are.
I would actually say it's probably not reasonable to interpret that as supporting.
Well, I agree. Yeah.
And my reason there is that if I'm remembering correctly, and it's been a while since I pulled up my Hebrew Old Testament, if I remember correctly, the verb forms used when Elohim is the subject are still singular. So while Elohim is morphologically plural, it does not seem to be grammatically plural from the standpoint of the text.
Yeah, I've heard two different theories, hypotheses or theories about that. One of them, like in the Genesis account 1 or 2, I forget what it is, but like when he said, "Let us go down and create men in our image." One of them, God talking to the angels, telling them to do this, and then one other theory is God's talking to himself in the Trinity version.
Yeah, that's the two main interpretations. In Judaism, they really hold to the angel, like talking about the host of heaven, like let us, like me and the angels. And then the Christian view is it's just Father, Son, Holy Spirit, let us go down. And then we see he stops referring to himself as us once the Holy Spirit is with Abraham, which is pretty good evidence, I would say. But this is I've never heard anyone say that. I'm just saying, I noticed like once God is with Abraham, he stops referring to himself as us. And so maybe it's because the Holy Spirit is with Abraham, and now they're kind of separate, so to speak. I mean, not separate, but you know what I mean. So now we would stop saying us because us isn't really all together. I've never heard anyone actually give a reason for why he stops referring to himself as us. I've just heard for why he refers to himself plural, I think Trinity is the best answer, but yeah, I don't know, but yeah, I mean, I think the hermeneutics are pretty clear, and I mean, I saw this person says that's easy. The Bible isn't meant to be taken literally, but like just that, I've heard that probably like 24 million times, and I agree. The whole Bible isn't meant to be taken literally.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, like do you like that reminds me, we talked about this earlier before something started, but like do you think the Bible says the Earth is flat, and do you think the Earth is flat?
So no, I don't think the Earth is flat, and I think it's pretty obvious that the Bible's not teaching a flat Earth at all. But especially in Job, when it talks about the horizon separating the darkness from the light, which would only work on a sphere. But yeah, I've heard. Oh, sorry. Well, Eric.
Yeah, and Cody, correct me if I'm wrong. Didn't you ask me and didn't you or somebody in the chat on Saturday ask me like what I think that the Bible says about the age of the Earth in general?
I don't remember. Sorry.
All right. Well, let's just say that my memory is correct.
Okay.
Let's just say theoretically. You probably might remember in my opening statement with my debate with Ken Hovind, after the whole year of research about dinosaurs and the Bible, just being honest, it just led me to the conclusion like that the Bible is more concerned like with the more it's more concerned like with like the more important aspects of Christianity is the fact that is to tell you essentially like who God is, and then it's to set up the relationship between humans.
Yeah, I remember. Or I think I remember on Age of your video with Merritt Kaiser, you were talking about the Bible is more for getting people saved.
Yes.
Well, I mean, I think that's how we think it's more important to get people saved. I mean, Bible itself, I think on every topic it's equally important, but like for salvation, which is most important to humans, that's where we think it's definitely most important, and that's what most of the New Testament is about. But I think on topics of history, I think it's perfect. It doesn't get anything wrong. I think on cosmology, it never gets anything wrong. I know a lot of people say, well, it talks about, has flat earth passages, but then they always point to like Psalms, and then right after, which is poetry, and then right after poetry, where it talks about pillars of the earth, and it talks about God having wings. It's like, well, no, this is poetry. It's you're not supposed to take it literally. This person says, so we just take the convenient parts literally, or well, no, what I said was I don't take the whole Bible literally, because if I did, I would need to take an English class again. So I take the literal parts literally, and I take the poetic parts as poetry, and I take the prophetic parts as prophecy, and I take the just like the instruction parts, like like Proverbs, like wisdom, which is also poetry, but
like stoning somebody for working Saturday, you don't take that literally either, probably.
No, I do take the Old Testament law literally, but when you study Christian theology, as Jesus said, all those laws were fulfilled through him, and he gave us 2 commandments afterward. Now we only live by 2 laws: love God with all your heart and love your neighbor as yourself. So we don't actually do those Old Testament laws, but before the Messiah came and fulfilled those laws, then we would have done those, but those aren't for us today. So I do take them literally, as everyone did, but I don't actually do them because they're not for us.
And I always want to chime in like about what you said about like the cosmology in the Bible, but
yeah.
What we have to understand is like that the ancient people's cosmology like has a heck of a lot different like than our cosmology now.
Oh yeah.
And so the thing about science, a key characteristic about science is like that it's willingness to change when new evidence arrives. So then what might have been accepted as the scientific consensus back then is of course different now, and it also will be different in the future. There are some things that we accept now that may not be true, but at the same time though, just because I say that, it also doesn't automatically mean that some of the stuff we accept now is not true. Like, of course, gravity has been something that's been accepted for the longest time, and it's pretty much 99.9% impossible that gravity is ever going to be disproven. And so it kind of goes back to what I said. You have to hook into it the way how they viewed it.
I don't actually think so when it comes to biblical cosmology. So I agree that I think the authors of the Bible, like Job, probably thought we lived on a flat disk, even though a flat disk with a dome, that cosmology. But even though I was actually watching an interesting episode of like a Christian apologist talking about like the firmament and stuff, and he was actually saying how there's actually a little evidence that the ancient Babylonians and people in the Mediterranean area actually believe in a flat Earth. But even if they did, I'll gladly accept it. Like I'm perfectly fine if the psalmists believe that Earth is flat. Here's where I differ with a lot of apologists. I don't think what the Bible itself is describing is a flat Earth dome cosmology. I think it's describing accurate, and so far it's been accurate. But I think the authors themselves probably thought they were writing down, under the inspiration of the Holy Spirit, probably thought they were writing down like flat Earth cosmology. But it's obvious that it couldn't be flat Earth. It would contradict itself. But so I don't like. There's what's his name? Michael Heiser, is that his name?
Yeah. Well, Michael Heiser.
He thinks that the Bible really did write down just erroneous cosmology, even though not in Job, that's for sure. But so he says just accept the erroneous cosmology, but then the rest of the Bible isn't erroneous. Well, if that's true, then like the Bible is wrong just within day 2 of creation. So I mean, when it talks about the firmament, right? So I mean, no, I definitely don't. I don't think that at all. I think it's entirely accurate. Even if it goes against what modern scientific community says, I think that, I mean, like all the science in the 1700s, by the 1800s, it was all like 90% of it wasn't even accepted. It was disproven. I mean, cosmologies come and cosmologies go. It's not like you just accept one thing. Oh, the Bible's wrong. Because the Bible is really good at correcting people in science and history and theology. You know what I mean? I mean, you're Christians. You already know that. But I mean, that's why in my debate, I'm always saying make the Bible the standard. And for someone that doesn't do that, it's going to sound like circularity. But, make the Bible the standard, because science comes, science goes, but not the Bible.
I actually have a little question about that. If it turns out that you're wrong about your interpretation of the Bible, and it's an interpretation that's I would say that in many cases there are interpretations of the Bible where there's more than one interpretation that conflict with each other, but that don't necessarily conflict with the text. If you were in a situation like that, and your standard weren't judging it based on reality, then how would you ever know if you were wrong about the Bible in a situation where more than one interpretation could be viable?
Man, I just want to chime in on that. It kind of goes what I said during my opening with Ken Hovind a little bit. I was saying that, like that it's a false dichotomy about the age of the earth. And it's kind of like when people in the 1980s, I forget their names, but yeah, it has happened. And if you're curious, who can do the research yourself? People said that, I believe 1984, saying that, oh, well, Jesus does not return in 1984. Well, then Christianity is not true. But, but the thing is, what a Christianity depends on the absolute most, and I'm sure that Cody will agree, whether or not if Jesus really did rise from the dead. Christianity holds by that weedy beady string. If Jesus did not rise from the dead, then
that's definitely the main thing. Yeah.
Honestly, I would say it's the only thing. No matter what else is true, if there's a guy named Jesus who died in Jerusalem on a cross and then on Friday, and then Sunday he wasn't dead anymore, that's it. Christianity is at its fundamental point true. If it's not, then no matter how true anything else in the Bible might be, then it's Christianity at its core isn't true.
Yeah, I mean, to me, inerrancy of Scripture is also a big deal. Like how Jesus said that his law meaning the scriptures, would never go away, would never be lost. And so to me, if we did, and I study textual criticism, and I believe in inerrancy of scripture, and I know that there have been things added by scribes, and we know what they are, but if we were to lose and know we've lost scripture, I would say Christianity probably isn't true, but that's probably not enough for some people.
I'm actually thinking about trying I'm planning a video involving textual criticism, because it's a very interesting field about doing things like manuscript families and tracing scribal errors through copyists and things like that.
I love it.
So actually, if you have any particularly good books or anything you recommend, I would love to get recommendations on that.
I have a person to recommend. I have a person wrote 100 books. He's massive in textual criticism. He's translated Bibles. He's amazing. So his name's it's Dr. James White.
I'm familiar with him.
Okay,
he lives pretty close to me.
Oh yeah,
really?
Yeah, I live very close to Dr. James White.
Just interview him.
I have thought about it because the textual criticism angle is a very interesting one, and but one of the interesting things is the way that we reconstruct family trees for Bible manuscripts is the same technique that's used to reconstruct genetic family trees for different organisms, because they both involve copying errors being carried forward.
Yeah, well, the tracing Bible manuscript families and all these things, it's a lot more. It's really, really like unique. It's its own total study. It's not it's not like it's just parallel with.
It's actually very strongly parallel though, because in both cases you look at where you can see evidence of, in certain groups or areas, we have changes
I'd probably
that
agree
are
with
inherited by daughter or child lineages, if we don't want to sex it.
That's a pretty good example of. I never thought about it like that.
It also happens we also do a similar thing with language families. Like the reason that we know that English and Hindi and Pashtun and Latin and Greek and French and German are all Indo-European languages is because we can trace certain sound and lexical changes through time in different locations. Just even without having written examples of older languages, we can still do it just with the modern languages, because we can trace back those changes. And so we can reconstruct the most likely form of Proto-Indo-European words in a similar way that we can use textual criticism to trace back the likely original form for various texts. And of course, just like with biblical criticism, or textual criticism, with linguistics and with doing the same thing with genetics, there's always going to be some cases where it's like, it could go either way on the initial reading of whatever this is.
Yeah, there's a lot of stuff like that in textual criticism.
Yeah, and I think that the thread that connects all three of those things is it's genetic descent. And by genetic, I don't mean in the sense of DNA. I mean in the sense of like all of these things are growing by being reproduced in an organic fashion. Like languages grow and change organically as populations of speakers move around and slowly change the way they speak and split into separate groups of speakers, and they start changing differently in different places. And the same thing is true for texts. You know, if you look at the Bible, these scribal additions or errors or deletions or whatever start to accumulate as the Bible is copied, and certain copies are based on other copies, and a different copy is based on a different copy. And so that's this organic change. And the same
it's like because the manuscripts, they all go their own separate ways and they become different things. So the criticism involves, what did the original writer write, you know? So so it's like looking at all those textual variances that have been spread out through all the continents, and you're seeing it's really hard. But it's cool.
And that was why that on Saturday I thought that I should present this article in my opening about interpreting Genesis. If you
if you want to, you can screen share that if it's on your computer, or just let's just have a paper of it.
Yeah. It's. I don't know how well you guys can see it.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so
I can't really make that out, but maybe if I were on my bigger screen, I don't know.
If you want, Dapper, I actually can send you a link to the paper itself, like on Twitter, and I can even do the same thing for the rest of
I mean,
you.
I'd be interested in it.
Yeah, or link it in the chat, and I can link it in the chat. I can put it in the description.
Yeah,
Mhm.
and so pretty much what the paper talks about it is pretty much about how we need to be cautious with interpreting Genesis. We have to understand, like that, it was not written in modern day English, and if we misread it, it actually can lead to denial of, of science and including evolution. And I know that Cody, will disagree on that, and that's fine. But it's just.
Well, speaking of James White, he thinks he speaks Hebrew and Greek and German. He thinks that the Hebrew in Genesis is literal, it's supposed to be taken 6 24-hour days fundamentally. So that's what the Hebrew suggests with Yom and just the overall writing style of whoever wrote it.
Right, but I don't know that you'll disagree, but the Hebrew word Yom can actually mean a lot of different things.
Yeah.
Even though that, even though that you could interpret it as a 24-hour day, and and I'm not saying like that you shouldn't because I say so. I'm just saying like that it also could mean always. It could mean ago. It could mean a lot of things. And now at the same time, though, I'm also not saying, oh, well, the Bible speaks of the earth being old. It's because, just by me personally, by the decision that I made, I don't think that the Bible speaks of how old the earth is at all. And I'm not trying to be redundant, but it's just that, it's just not what the Bible is concerned about.
Yeah, it's not. But with Yom itself, like I agree, it can be used in many ways, just like day in English can be used in many ways in one sentence, but it's the context that defines what it means. And even in Genesis itself defies that day is light and then the darkness is night, meaning an ordinary day. And it goes off to say there was evening and there was morning, marking the day, and then with a numerical day, and saying first day, second day, third day, fourth day, fifth day, sixth day, seventh day. And in Exodus 20:11, God says, "Because I made the sea and everything in the world in 6 days, therefore you're going to work in 6 days, and you're also going to rest on the seventh day." So it's the context that easily defines Yom, and it's really not like that hard to figure out. But the reason that there's motivation to change or reinterpret that word Yom is because people don't like a literal Genesis, but the truth is the Hebrew, from all I've done, I don't speak Hebrew, but I've studied specifically with the creation, and it really does seem to suggest, I know there's obvious presupposition, but it really suggests 6 24-hour days just based entirely on context. But then every time it's referenced in the Bible, it also means 6 days. There's no way you get errors. I would never say 6 days meaning 6 years unless it was like prophecy, but I know they always say, we don't know how. No one struggles with day in the rest of the Bible. Jonah was in the whale for 3 days. Why does no one struggle with that time period? Joshua, 7 days as well. He marched around Jericho. No one struggles with it because there's no motivation to get it to say something else that they would prefer it to say. But evolution and old earth and local flood believers, they want the creation to not be something so quick and miraculous and rapid, but they'd prefer it to be something very naturalistic or just long ages, time periods. But Hebrew scholars are so divided on that topic that there's no way to reference scholars. For every scholar that says it's literal days, there's another scholar that says it can mean long periods of time. But again, it's that context. And in Hebrew and in the Greek translation of the Old Testament and in the English and every language, it's very clearly meaning 6 24-hour days.
And with me going with the cosmic temple amalgamation, I actually would agree like that it was six, like that it was 6 literal 24-hour days. But at the same time, though, I would just say that those were days and like when God decided like to assign function. But you also have to understand and like that, you know, kind of like what I said, you don't have to go with that interpretation. And Muhammad, I mean, you certainly can, and you also have to understand and that these biblical scholars actually are studying the context of it. And oh yeah, and how that we're going off topic a little bit. I'm sorry, but there was this question I was wanting to ask you.
Me?
Yeah.
Okay.
So you mentioned during the debate, and you didn't clarify, and I was wanting to ask, but I got caught up with other things. So you said that you were convinced by some of the dinosaur carvings. Which ones?
Some of them. I guess I would have to share my screen then. Like again, I'm not convinced by.
Would one of them be like the alleged sauropod on the rock wall?
I gotta be honest with you, I can't really. I think I know what you're talking about, though. Yeah.
Say what? Dapper?
That looks like a blue circle, not a dinosaur.
Yeah, well, we can't really see the.
I'm just kidding. I'm just messing with you.
I can't really see the thing, but I'm not sure, honestly.
Maybe this one will be.
I've seen that one. Yeah, I think it's convincing.
But when you look at the context, all that it actually is just a bunch of.
Well, I mean, I have. Well, that's the picture on the paper. I mean, I have the actual thing here, the actual picture, the enhanced like.
What's that called?
This
like, what if I wanted to find an image? What would I search?
I'm pretty sure it's found in Utah, I believe. I don't remember the name off the top of my head, but I'm pretty sure it shouldn't be too hard.
I mean, if it's from Utah, I think it's probably just a picture of a snake trying to eat some fries with fry sauce.
Yeah, I mean, but like I'm looking at the actual picture of the wall, and that what was on the paper is not. It's not there, so.
It's just the thing is, on the original wall, you actually can vaguely see it, and then
see some stuff under the dinosaur, but like it's very clear that there's a difference between what was on the paper and what's actually on the wall. Like it's very obvious that this is something that looks. If it's not a dinosaur, it looks at least just like one. Long tail, 4 legs under, long neck, little head.
But you also have to understand that according to sauropod anatomy, sauropod's tails actually did not drag like that. Sauropod's tail is actually like.
Yeah, I know. They sway like a cedar.
Which I pointed out to you about.
Actually, no, they were much too stiff to sway like a cedar.
Yeah, I know. And that's why cedars are stiff.
Actually, no.
It's not the branches.
Middle Eastern cedars are actually rather wispy and go back and forth a lot. American cedars are quite stiff, but they're not the same species, and it's very unlikely the title is referring to the American cedar.
Yes, the tail of the behemoth. It's like there's different ways to translate, but all of it simply just says sways, or it erects, or it stiffens like a cedar. And then someone in the chat, I didn't get to respond. They said. Like in the debate, they said they were using the King James English translation without going to anything else, and they were like, "See, it's talking about testicles and stuff." It's like, yes, that was the King James translator's interpretation. Let's look at the Hebrew, and of course, the Hebrew doesn't even. I've looked at the Masoretic text, the Septuagint, Sentinel Apologetics is trying to convince me this on Facebook. I'm like, dude, I'm looking at all the Hebrew. It's not there. But again. I'm not necessarily trying to argue that the behemoth is a specifically sauropod, but I think it's obviously some sort of dinosaur.
So if it's not a sauropod, since you said obviously it has to be a dinosaur, so if not a sauropod, what is it then? And also, like I pointed out, it says that it has a nose that pierces through snares. I don't know of any dinosaur that has a nose that pierces through snares at all.
Yeah, I mean, well... I guess I have a better question. Step back for a second. What animal is this then? You're an evolutionist.
That a question for me?
Yeah.
Well, because of the nose that pierces through snares, I just personally think that's I just personally think it's an elephant, and it also talks about how it has strong bones, or well, elephants have strong bones too, and they kind of have to is because of the fact that they weigh so much. Then when they run, and if they didn't have strong bones when they run, of course their bones would break. And even like I said about the tree being mentioned, it's not describing what the tail looks like. It's just describing the movement, and the cedar tree that existed during Job's day is the Lebanese cedar tree, and the Lebanese cedar tree looks just like a tail of an elephant. And
also moves like one.
They're also right, and it moves high like an elephant's tail. And there also are some people who say that behemoth is a rhino or a hippopotamus. I guess I can get where they're coming from, but just me personally,
I know where they're coming from. They're coming from
Africa.
They're coming from it can only be something modern or something that coexisted with man, because they don't like when it says they don't like the idea of it being something that is like a dinosaur. But I mean, your description of
there's something you said a whole bunch of times, and it's that someone doesn't like this, so they're interpreting it in a way that is.
Yep. So hang on.
With this. But
I know, but hang on.
You can't impute whether or not these people like these things. I would much rather have behemoth be a sauropod.
Right?
No, I'm not saying you literally don't like it. I'm not saying you literally don't prefer it. What I mean by that is just in general, you can't have it that way. You need it to be something else. So the motivation is to change it.
I don't need it to be anything. I'm just saying that Listen, you would not ever accept that being a dinosaur in Job's day, because it contradicts your theory. No, you would not. I absolutely would.
No, you wouldn't.
A late surviving sauropod doesn't contradict anything about anything. It's just unlikely. And second, in order to come up with an unusual interpretation, you have to have good evidence. And the fact is that the animal described isn't clearly a sauropod. And we don't know that there were sauropods in the area at the time, whether or not the story of Genesis flood.
Could it be any dinosaur?
It could, but at the same time, no.
Any dinosaur is the least likely explanation.
Well, it's not the least likely explanation, because if the young Earth interpretation is correct, well, then why would God be talking about an elephant when he's talking about the chief of the way? Or like the description you described for an elephant doesn't fit at all. It only fits for some things, but another time it doesn't really work.
Okay, let's assume young Earth creationism is true. Dinosaurs got off the ark. We don't know how long they lasted. We don't know exactly when Job was written, nor do we know whether or not there were dinosaurs there. If God wants to impress Job with a big animal, he's not going to use an animal that Job hasn't heard of. We don't know.
How do you know Job hasn't heard of dinosaurs? That's all. You just based a case. Yes, you literally just said Job probably doesn't know. Therefore, why would God say?
No, I said Job.
Look at something doesn't know. And I have a better question. Why would God use an animal?
You know what?
That's
I'm
really
going to finish my point, and then you can ask your question. Since we don't know if there were dinosaurs around at the time and place that Job was written, but we have really good reasons to say that we do know that there were elephants and hippos and rhinos, at least nearby. We can say it's very likely that Job knew what an elephant was and what a hippopotamus was and what a rhino was. It's less likely he knew what a sauropod was, because we have no evidence of there being sauropods in historical times in the Middle East.
Well, listen. Okay.
Now you can ask your question.
I don't remember what my question was specifically.
Sorry.
I guess it would be for Eric. So, there's a lot of Job 40 really describes this creature in detail. So first off, do you think this was a actual animal, wasn't mythical?
So I heard that there is some debate whether or not if Job, the whole thing about Job was if it was just the whole thing is just supposed to be a parable, or if it's something that really happened. Just my own personal opinion, I do think that I personally do think it did happen, but I just kind of think it's just described in just a metaphorical way, think, say how that I'm going to tell you the event about when I woke up this morning. I'll say that, I woke up on the wrong side of the bed. And so, like I said, with me loving dinosaurs, I would love Behemoth to be a dinosaur. Yeah, man, it kind of goes back to what I said. It's the bottom line is scientists are not trying to, they're not trying to take it away from God. It's not like that scientists say, oh, well, we have to have dinosaurs living millions of years before man. It's because, we wanted to disprove the Bible. That's not it at all. The bottom line of a scientist is let the evidence bring you to your conclusion. And regardless what your presupposition is, you have to let the evidence bring you to your conclusion. And like I said, I would love Behemoth to be a dinosaur. Man, out of all people, I would love it to be a dinosaur. But just honestly, after looking at the context and just examining like the creatures that lived, like in Job's day, when it mentions the chief of God, I understand that some young earth creationists will say, well, it has to be a sauropod. But we also have to understand that in that area, I forget the elephant's name, but in that area, there actually is a species of elephant like that was the largest in that spot. And so that's one of the reasons why that I think it's an elephant. And another reason, it also says that he lieth under the shady tree or some sort of tree. I forget the name off the top of my head. Okay, so if you were to say that it's Argentinosaurus, which is the largest sauropod ever found, I mean, no joke, just a vertebrae of an Argentinosaurus alone is about half the size of my bed. So to think that if an Argentinosaurus were even to lie down underneath the shady tree or whatever, it just wouldn't work. It's because of just how enormously huge it was. But yet you wouldn't have that problem with an elephant, rhino, or a hippopotamus, or etc. And like I said, a sauropod dinosaur or any dinosaur does not have a nose that pierces it through snares. And honestly, does it bum me out that Behemoth is not a dinosaur? Yeah. But, just honestly, after looking at the evidence of seeing when, in the fossil record, when sauropods went extinct, we're not saying that, oh, well, it's flat, and oh, well, we're saying it's possible. It's because we want it to be that way. That's not the job of a scientist. Even with the coelacanth, people thought for the longest time like that the coelacanth was done for. And hi, Simba. And oh yeah, so I was talking about the coelacanth. Sorry, it's just that my dog here kind of.
You want to be a guest star?
But yeah, and so God darn you, Simba!
And that's how we got 100 new viewers. The dog came on camera.
Yeah. But yeah, Simba, say hi to everyone. And so, so evolution does not say, oh, well, a species has to go extinct by this certain time frame. I also know that there are young earth creationists who actually use the coelacanth as an argument against evolution, saying, oh, well, it hasn't changed at all.
Which it has.
Yes, and it has actually. There actually has been coelacanths found in the Paleocene and Miocene. Correct me if I'm wrong, Dapper.
I don't know if any Miocene coelacanths, but I know.
I'm pretty sure there was a Paleocene or a Pliocene.
So the way I remember the fossil record for coelacanths, and again, my wheelhouse is more in Mesozoic ornithodirans, so coelacanths are a bit outside of that area,
right?
Just a little bit. But from what I remember, the last coelacanth fossils known were in the Cretaceous, and they do not occur above the KPG or the KT or whatever we want to call it now boundary. But that no fossil coelacanth is in the same family as the modern coelacanths.
Right, and
The current explanation is that the coelacanths that we have were all shallow water organisms, which preserve fairly readily, whereas deep water organisms tend not to preserve very well, and even when they do, because oceanic crust tends to be subsumed under the mantle so frequently, we tend not to get very old fossils from deep water marine sediments, because they're just rare in general, which is why deep water animals are the ones that are most likely to end up being Lazarus taxa in the modern day.
Hey, real fast, Cody. Somebody has a question for you.
Yeah, I wanted to answer about the gap theory. So gap theory is basically that there's millions or hundreds of thousands of years between the first and second verse of Genesis, and so then that was the idea came up in the 1800s because Christians were kind of concerned about what to do with all these scientists that are saying the Earth is billions or millions of years old. So they are like, oh well, let's just take the text and put those years between the first two verses of the Bible, and the problem is. It's a sneaky theory. It's a sneaky theory. The problem is there's not really enough biblical evidence to support it at all. I think all it is really just what Christians were doing. They were just really compromising the text to fit what they thought was right, and they didn't need to do that. So just another theory. It's no different than framework hypothesis or day age or progressive creationism or theistic evolutionism. In my opinion, the Bible, it was written truthfully. It was preserved without any errors. In the Hebrew, there's no problems with it. In general, I mean, but so we don't need to put we don't need to put millions of years between verses that aren't there. It's kind of ridiculous. And all the problem is, well, with that theory, you have death before sin. You have all these major theological problems. Which is another reason I don't really buy it. I will admit to this guy, gap theory is one of the best old Earth reinterpretations I've heard, but it's not enough. It's one of the best interpretations I've heard, but there's not enough biblical evidence to support it. So I just don't buy it. I just think it's totally stretching the text to say something it's not in any way saying. I think it's pretty obvious what the text is actually saying, but yep.
And so I was wanting to get back to the coelacanth. I know that we're jumping back and forth. And so people need to understand like that fish fossilize a lot differently than dinosaurs do. It's a lot easier for dinosaurs to fossilize. It's because of their bones are a lot harder. The harder the bone is, the easier it is to fossilize. And so then that's why that there are some spots in the fossil record where you don't see some particular where you don't see some particular organisms like the coelacanth. Yeah. But then it was eventually found in some of the Cenozoic layers like that. There were some coelacanths found. I can see that there were changes, but they were just slow changes. Coelacanths are known essentially as the slowpokes of evolution.
Sorry, real fast. Can you two questions? One for you and one for Cody.
Or
Cody, we're both of you. A second, Cody. If you want to pay attention to the chat, you can answer questions in chat without actually having to answer it. If somebody's talking, you can answer questions in chat if you want to in the chat, live chat. If you pay attention to that, people are asking you questions. And two, I forget, are coelacanth is that the species or the family? And Corinthians is like I forget which is which.
I can help with that.
I'm pretty sure that it's a family. I'm pretty certain that there's not just one coelacanth, and it's kind of like how like that there's not just one like any organism. It branches out. Like what Dapper said, I think that he can.
Yeah. So so first we got to remember that words like family, order, class are all sort of that they don't mean a whole lot. Genus and species kind of mean something, but coelacanths are, if we include the fossil examples, they're all part of the coelacanthiform order, and there have been a number of families. The only family that is extant is Latimeridae, and but there were numerous extinct families from the fossil record. And as far as I know, I don't know of any extensive fossil record for Latimerids. So yeah, coelacanths. If you were to go with crown coelacanths based on extant coelacanths, then only one family exists. But I would prefer to go with a more character-based definition, just because the taxonomy for coelacanths internally isn't super well figured out, in part because of a spotty fossil record. So
I also want to ask Cody something.
Okay.
Correct me if I'm wrong. Didn't you say that in your podcast about the flood, like that your family is also young Earth creationists?
My podcast about the flood?
Yeah. It was the one that you did with Merrick and one other guy.
Oh, yeah. Just that little discussion we had about like if Noah's flood is global or local.
Mhm.
So my family is not young Earth creationist, well, most of my family's not even Christian or anything. My dad's old Earth. My mom doesn't have a position. My sister yesterday she just called me and she called me and she was really mad at me. She was like yelling at me for 30 minutes over the phone for being Christian and interpreting Genesis, for literally. And so and she hung up on me. What?
Sorry for barging, but I know it's not my business, but I am kind of curious. Is like she an atheist, agnostic, Buddhist, or what?
She told me basically, I think she's agnostic.
Mm-hmm.
She's just mad at me for saying that she's mad at me basically for like that I'm trying to help people interpret Genesis in the way that I think is the right interpretation. That's all. Yeah.
Right, but like I said during the debate, I'm not saying the young Earth creationism is doing this as a whole. I don't have a problem with people being a young Earth creationist. When I talked to Mary Schweitzer about this on the phone, she has told me like that. She had a bunch of her students who are devout Christians who would come and bawl their eyes out to her, thinking like that they have to give up their faith because of all the overwhelming evidence that they see in evolution and old Earth, feeling like that they have to give up their faith. And there have been the majority of atheists actually were once Christians, like Richard Dawkins, Hugo and Jake, Heath. I'm sorry if I mispronounced his name. Heath Hythe or something like that.
Vice Rhino, Godless Engineer.
Right, Godless.
You mean the person who spells his name Hiith?
Yeah, him.
I heard him try to pronounce that name in one of his recent videos. He can't do it either, so don't feel bad.
Yeah, and so I'm assuming that he did that on purpose as like a gimmick or something.
Maybe. I don't know. I think it's supposed to be from some other language that he doesn't actually speak, but he likes the word. Because I remember, I think, if I remember correctly, he had old channel art with something in like Sumerian or something. So I think that's the thing. Which I've noticed now in pop culture, Sumerian is now the language that apparently your fictional demons speak. That's now the new hotness, which annoys me because why? Why would demons speak Sumerian?
And so, like I was saying, one of the main reasons why these Christians became an atheist is because that, like that they felt like that, oh, well, I had to choose one or the other. And so because of the overwhelming evidence, they just kind of felt like that, well, I'm going to have to reject my faith now, leave it behind. And one of the reasons why that I do what I do, and I'm not saying that, oh, well, people have to be theistic evolution because I say so. It's just that I'm just trying to say that, if a fellow brother or sister of mine in Christ feels like that they have to give up their faith now, and if someone's happy with being a young Earth creationist, fine. And if they're happy, I don't want to come, overstep my boundaries or anything. I've even had Christian parents come up to me, telling me that they're horrified taking their kids to the Museum of the Rockies, knowing that I go out on dinosaur digs, like that I am the one who they should talk to, saying that, I'm afraid that if I take my kids there, it's going to take them away from God. And so I don't want to overstep my boundaries. I don't want to be too dogmatic about it. I'll just say, hey, here are your options. And the majority of old Earth and theistic evolutionists actually were once young Earth creationists. And one of the reasons why that they came to those positions is because at one point they thought that they had to choose one or the other.
Yeah, I think I made a video about this. Same topic a few years ago, where there were different layers to this. There's young Earth creationist, old Earth creationist, theistic evolutionist. Then there's like the deist evolutionist, and then there's just plain out atheist.
Mm-hmm.
Remember what I said in the debate. I said you can be a Christian and believe in evolution. The problem is you're going to be completely inconsistent because you're accepting Jesus. You're a Christian. Well, that's great. And that's going to lead to eternal salvation. But the main problem is you're not accepting the logical foundation for why you accepted Jesus in the first place. You know what I'm saying? The theology is inconsistent if you're going to add all these interpretations to Genesis. It's more than just, what does the text say? Well, it comes down to what's it do to theology? What's it do to the rest of the Bible? And it messes it up if it's not fundamentally interpreted. I mean, say, but like I'm not saying you can't be a Christian and believe in. I think that'd be ridiculous to tell someone you can't be a Christian if you believe in evolution or whatever. But like Billy Graham, what he believed in theistic evolution. You can believe in evolution and.
Well, some people don't think that, like some people like Kent Hovind and Ken Ham don't think that literally say you can't be a Christian.
They never said that.
But the thing is, what I've noticed about Ken Ham is like that Ken Ham, and like that, he will try to make you feel bad, like for doing it. And like I said during my debate, Ken Ham can believe whatever he wants. What he believes is none of my business. But when I saw that series Science versus the Ark encounter, it definitely made me rethink. And I'm not saying, Cody, you have to. I'm just saying
I know.
recommend that you check that out. And I might want to chime in on the theology. Yes, and I do agree that you do have to change your theology. But personally, I don't see that as a bad thing.
You have to change the foundation for why Jesus died on the cross. You don't see any problem with that?
Well, it's just that we have to understand Jesus died for us.
Yeah, he died. He died on the cross, and because of his death, that's paying our sins. Because the death pays the sins, because the death was brought in the world by sin. But if death exists before sin, then the death doesn't pay the sins. Therefore, Jesus' death on the cross doesn't pay our sins if evolution is true, because then there was death before man sinned. That's the inconsistent theology.
But like I said, it says death came to all men. And then on that day, Adam did not physically die.
I know. He spiritually died.
And so then that would explain it.
Yep.
He spiritually died. And also
he died, and then death was brought into the world. Therefore, he actually died.
Death.
No, he died spiritually on the day. It says, "In the day you eat thereof, ye shall surely die." So he ate.
But Adam did not physically die.
So then, after that, then here comes his curse. God's saying all the things he's bringing in the world. He's totally changing everything, bringing in the curse of Genesis. Do you know why Jesus wore a crown of thorns on his head? It's because the curse of Genesis. He's wearing it on his head. The curse of Genesis was, out of the ground, thorns and thistles shall grow for you. That's why Jesus wore thorns and thistles on his head. It's so theologically significant. Even if evolution is true, it's Christian theology is messed up if evolution is true.
I want to say it's messed up. It's just that you just have to look at it differently. And like I said, just because one interpretation of scripture says otherwise, it doesn't disprove Christianity. What does whether or not Jesus really was who he said that he was.
So Cody, question for you. I relate. So do you think the Bible's literally and stuff? Do you think in Adam and Eve didn't do that fruit thing? Would everyone born from then to now still be alive now? Like the whole.
Well, the Bible doesn't specifically say what would happen, but it seems to be, from the interpretation of Scripture, just the general interpretation that they were made to live forever, and then they sinned, so now death was brought in, so now they're not going to live forever. Yeah.
So we'd be hanging out with Adam right now on Earth. If
I'm sure. I mean, he lived like 900 years. According to the Bible, he lived about 900 years, and most of the people before the flood did, until the genetic bottleneck from Noah when it changed then. But yeah, so I don't think we would be alive, because God said to fill the earth. He didn't say to overpopulate the earth. And I never got to respond to Eric in the debate about that. It's like, yeah, if they live forever, the instruction was fill the earth. He didn't say overpopulate it. So if I was to be part of that population, I would see Adam. Yeah. Based on what the Bible says. I hope that helps.
Yeah, but I think we've been going on with this a little bit long, and I also am getting kind of hungry now, and
yeah, me too.
Yeah, and trust me, if it wasn't for the time constraints, I definitely could go on, but it's just that I don't want to starve myself.
Okay, so as we wrap it up, you guys want to like what's the word? Promote any of your future stuff on your channels and stuff?
Who wants to go first?
I'll go last.
You can go, Eric.
All right. Well, I've had my YouTube channel for 10 years now. I started my channel when I was spiritual but not religious, and so then that's why in my old videos I would cuss like a sailor and everything. And my YouTube channel originally started up as a movie channel. It's because of the fact like that I'm a big movie buff, and there's a lot of horror movie stuff on my channel, and I know that there's some disagreement about horror films and Christianity, but just me personally, I don't see a problem with it. I don't know if Cody will agree or not, but that's a topic for a different day. But on my YouTube channel, I do still, do movie stuff, but I also didn't want to get redundant about it, and so then that's why I branched off. I have done a few philosophical stuff on it, and I've even I've even done like some comedy sketches like
Things you hate.
Yeah. I have this series called Things That Piss Me Off, and the whole joke of the series is by the fact about like how in the series I actually play an exaggerated angry version of me, and and the whole joke of the series is like, oh my lord, like this guy is getting angry over like the silliest of things, and and there was a time when I would like do like a bunch of prank call videos, and and the funny thing was like during one of them, I actually used a site like called Prank Dial. It pretty much is like where you can use like a fake number like to prank call someone else, and like where it's like a voice automated thing. Well, the funny thing is on one of them, I just by a huge coincidence, I actually ended up calling this guy by the same number as his girlfriend. Oh man, that was funny. I was laughing so hard. And so recently, because of my debate with Ken Hovind, I've been getting into a little bit more stuff about religion, but because of the fact that not the majority of my audience are Christians, it's because that when I started off my YouTube channel, it wasn't about religion at all. So that's why in my videos about religion, I try to be careful with what I say. It's because, of course, religion is a big topic, just like politics, abortion, and etc. And so, so my channel is definitely a variety of things. Dapper and I also even said that we should like do a movie talk podcast or something like that.
Yeah, I actually, I am a partner in a movie channel that's just recently started. It's the CBAD show, CBADD. I am one of the 4 people there, but we are open to having the occasional guest. So, yeah, it would be
Awesome.
interesting.
I can volunteer for that.
Okay.
If it's scheduled.
I mean, it's not entirely up to me. I am only 1/4 of the team. The rest of the team, actually, 75% of the team is actually either on this stream or in the chat right now, because Benthoven and Amos Marcos are also 25%, and then Cheshire Vic, who you may recognize from some of Steve McRae's streams, is also rounds out our 4-person team.
Network connections.
Exactly. So that's one thing I have to plug is check that out. We are mostly doing riff track style things. So a lot of for movies that we can't play on screen, which is most movies, we have an on-screen time code so that you can check the time code of the movie you're watching to sync it up. And we also have Manos, The Hands of Fate, and Night of the Living Dead, which we do show on screen and do have the full audio for the movies. So,
I mean, when you say Night of the Living Dead, I mean, there are so many versions of it.
The original
version, yeah.
Yeah, the original one, it's in black and white and all. The only other thing I have really to plug is my main.
2006. That one was.
No. Yeah, we'll pass on that. I mean, we might do it to make fun of it, but my other thing that I have is my main channel. I do mostly science-related content, and usually I use the misunderstanding of some science involved as a launching point to talk about whatever the topic is. So someone says something silly about astronomy, and I'll put that in as a clip, and I'll go talk about astronomy. Or someone says something silly about evolution, and I'll do
Samurai
that.
Cop, yeah, Bob.
Right.
Samurai Cop, I love that movie.
Yeah, Space Cop and Samurai Cop. Yeah, those are things we're gonna have to get to. As far as coming up, I am in the process of animating and rendering part 3 of a video series about some Genesis apologetics material. I also am at the beginning of a video talking about the law of monophyly as it relates to both the past and the future, and I'm going to be using a website that I quite enjoyed to do it, and I just got permission from the website's creator, so that's actually going to work out. And I was informed recently that one of my viewers specifically alerted Kent Hovind to my channel, so there may actually be some response videos from Kent Hovind to me, which I may end up responding to. So that could be live stream fodder, because as you might know, I do a series called Kent with Bent Hovind here, where we go live and I live respond to Kent Hovind videos while getting exaggeratedly upset. It's sort of a character. I'm not honestly that angry,
right?
But it's for comedic effect mostly.
Mom, it kind of goes back to what I said about my things that piss me off series. Don't take it seriously. It's just a joke. And I actually forgot to mention this. On the 27th of this month, I'm actually going to be doing a podcast with Inspiring Philosophy. One of the reasons why that I thought I should do the podcast with him is because the fact that it'll be really interesting that we would do a podcast about both of our debates with Ken Hovind.
Okay. Yeah.
So on the 27th, I believe 6 or 7 p.m. my time, which is a mountain time, you can look forward to that. And it's not the first time that he has been on my channel.
All right, so Cody, anything you want to advertise for your coming up for you?
I don't have a lot online, but my YouTube channel is Cody Sorensen. If you just type Cody, then S and O, you'll see it.
Yeah, can you put all your links in the chat so I can put it in the description? So
I literally just have the YouTube. So okay. I mean,
I just found Cody's.
You're gonna see a lot of my old music, when it was released with labels and stuff. When you type my name, but the channel should be at the top.
I just linked to Cody's channel.
Yeah, you can link
I'll
it or
listen
whatever.
to your intro. That's a nice narration.
Yeah, somebody put all the links in the channels. I can put in the description later on.
Yeah, I'll just
cool.
share
Thanks.
this.
Anyway,
But yeah, guys, I kind of would like to I kind of like to finally have my meal now. So
I gotta wrap it up. I'll wrap it up real fast.
Yeah, I'm just adding links.
Okay.
I'm starving.
Okay, me too. But anyways, join me. Thanks everybody being here. Join me this Saturday with my guest from last Saturday as we talk about the conclusion of the Dr. Nopa series with Dr. Nopa V3. As I always say, never stop learning and enjoy the randomness. We'll see you next time.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Everybody.
Bye bye. Now I can finally go eat.